permitted maximum of the height is 120 feet. This particular building has like 20 floors, so it's 200 feet. There's only two pedestals, 2 floors in the pedestal, but that's where all the main parking is contained. There's no step backs in this particular building. You can see here, it's right up against the waterfront. And again, it very much like the other examples, there's very little active use along that street, and it's understandable simply because that is the only road that takes you into that particular district. So it's very hard to provide active use on that street when you have all of the vehicular access, both service as well as as a resident off of that main road. But in terms of the massing itself, if you look at the floor plate is actually quite small. 14,700 square feet, 15,000 square feet is not massive. The only thing I would say about this particular building in terms of the mass is that it appears to be massive, and the only reason for that is basically because it is at the end of that one road, and it blocks the view and the accessibility from the waterfront. But in terms of the actual size of the building, it's not massive. So what are the general observations about all of these districts? The MBRA, IOA, SLA, and the SBMNG. I'm not going to run through all of them, but I'm just going to run through the main ones. So one of the observations in general is that some of the older existing buildings in all of these districts exceed the maximum permitted building height density by code. Some of the older buildings that are greater than 115 feet in height do not provide the minimum required setback of half the height that is required by code. The floor area ratio is actually one of those development standards that I said earlier. It's kind of inconsistent. In some districts it applies, and in some districts it doesn't. So, for example, it's not applicable to the SLA, the IOA, or the MBRA, but it is for the other district. So again, that inconsistency. Some of the new buildings exceed the FAR, and one of the biggest things that we learned is that restricting the floor area ratio does not always guarantee a less bulky building or a more predictable form. In fact, FAR, which was established to be able to control buildable area, again, density and intensity, it's really all about how much area you can build, where you put it, and how you design it, and whether you cluster it to one side of the lot and you make one big, tall, bulky building or a smaller step building. That is not factored in. So using FAR is not always your best tool to control mass in a particular building. Oh, and the last point, I'm sorry, is that one of the things that we saw in our analysis is that without reducing the setbacks along the streetscapes and increasing lot coverage, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, the opportunity for active use is really limited because, again, some of these lots are so narrow, like especially in the MBRA and IOA, that without doing that, you really just don't have the space within the lot to actually build active use. And I'm going to run through an example that will illustrate that quite clearly just after this. So in the ADA, and the next two sort of districts that we're going to talk about together are the ADA and the PRD. And the reason I chose to group them together is because in these districts, the maximum height is permitted to go to 200 feet as of right, and 240 feet with a height bonus. So I wanted to group those together because the character of those districts are completely different, clearly distinctly different from the other districts which have lower scale buildings. Now, for the W Hotel, which we're actually in today, the building length in this particular example is appropriate because development is composed of 3 separate building pedestals that are no longer than 200 feet each in length. The ADA permits a maximum building height of about 200 feet as of right. I mentioned that earlier. However, for site plan level 4 applicants, which means hotels and those kinds of intense developments, a developer can request an additional 40 feet of height if developments achieve a certain number of points in the design and compatibility scale table. We're going to talk about what that says a little bit later. In addition, the ADA permits a maximum FAR of 4 as of right. Again, site plan level 4 applicants can also request additional FAR from 4 to about 4.8. It just basically means that you're able to build more building area if you are a hotel, and you can, let's say, qualify for those criteria that are listed in the design compatibility scale table. We'll talk about that a little bit later. This building exceeds both the maximum permitted FAR and height, even with the bonus provision. And as we know, that's something that was approved at commission, so it's legal. But even though the buildings are taller and have additional floor area than that permitted by the district, the building's main components, meaning the pedestals, and again, these are the pedestals, and the towers, are appropriately sized. The floor plate size of the towers, for instance, are about 19,000 square feet. For this size of block and sort of this size of building development, it's actually quite good. It's not so big. The development, however, appears large overall, and this is due to two key factors. The first factor I would say is the overall building block length of the development. This development is an assemblage of two city blocks that were at one point separated by a street, which was Breakers Avenue. The second factor is the towers spanning over the pedestals. If you look very carefully, again, these are the two blocks that were consolidated without that street in order to create one development. And the towers spanning over the pedestals actually create the appearance that the building is more massive, even though in reality it's not, because you look at the different tower footplates and the building lengths of each of the pedestals. By the way, one of the ways an applicant can achieve points in the design and compatibility scale table that I mentioned earlier for both height and FAR is through lot assemblage. So this is something that we'll talk about later, because lot assemblage is not something that we would encourage if we want to control mass and scale. Now, the setback along Bayshore Drive is a bit too wide. The active use that is along the side of this street, which is basically this side of the street, is very seldomly used, very difficult to interact with because of the setback, from the street. Along Birch and Miramar, there's very little active use due to service, parking, and loading areas along those street frontages. However, we do know that that the developer is currently working on activating that and making it activating those specific street frontages and making more uses such as retail and outdoor cafes and things of that area to really lighten that streetscape. Obviously, along A1A, there's sufficient active use, and it's quite a lighting streetscape environment. And the last example in the PRD, is the Marriott Beach Place. The Marriott Beach Place is another example of a development that appears rather massive due to the block length, which is approximately 550 feet, with no real pedestrian breaks along Seabreeze. So this entire block is about 550 feet. And if you walk or drive along Seabreeze Boulevard, you'll realize that there's really no active use. It's all parking, loading, service, and all of that. So the environment is not really conducive for walking and biking. The building length is quite large, it's quite long. In this particular case, it's about 400 feet. And both the FAR and the height exceed the maximum permitted by code, even with the bonus provision that is in place today. So in terms of the general observations for these two districts, which are the ones that have the largest lot assemblages and the longest blocks, I would say that overall we came to realize that both old and new buildings exceed again the maximum building length and the height. Again, the lot sizes are bigger, creating larger developments along the blocks. The density in these two particular districts are not applicable. So definitely FAR is the only thing that's regulating building mass and intensity. So all the new buildings in the ADA and the PRD exceed the maximum permitted floor area ratio, as we talked about earlier, the FAR. And the floor plate sizes were actually appropriate. So the scale of the building components are probably appropriate. It's the aggregation of the lots and the long blocks that actually make the appearance of these buildings feel way more massive than we would think it is. Also, one of the other things that we notice is that buildings that are greater than 150 feet in height, again, in these two districts, did not provide that required minimum half the height setback requirement that is prescribed by code today. So I'm going to run through, this next part of the presentation is, we did the analysis of the existing buildings. I'm going to run through what are proposed. Yes.
The Venetian is 15 stories on 4 acres of land that doesn't look at anybody else's property. How can that be a legal thing? You can build anything you want on the beach. 4 acres there. That is 15 stories and 4 acres. Tell me another one. We're building one right in front of us that is going to be 16 stories on the beach and it's on a half acre. How can we be not permitted?
All right, I just want to clarify one thing. No, thank you for your input, and it's good to kind of air it out. I don't want to elongate the presentation, but I'll take 2 seconds to answer that. When I started, I said, we're looking at these, and we're not saying these are illegal. Codes change all the time. They're incredibly dynamic. So when we write a code, we write it 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and we were constantly revising them, almost every 5 years. We learn from those changes. Sometimes we make good decisions, and sometimes we don't. We're not saying with any of this that any of these buildings are non-conforming or that they're illegal. No, we're saying that yes, that it does not comply with the current code standards, but it doesn't mean that we're saying that that building is non-conforming or that it doesn't address, that it shouldn't be there and that it's illegal. We're not saying that. Obviously, those buildings are going to stay for life. The only purpose of looking at them is so that we understand why in our minds we can't figure out what it is that the standards are, why it is that the standards are being negotiated. If we don't understand, if we don't look at the past and kind of learn from it, we can't move forward. The past is the past, it's done. We're not going to change it, we're not going to condemn those buildings, we're not going to tear them down. But we can learn from them, because if we don't, we're never going to move forward, we're never going to resolve the issue of ambiguity with the code standards. So having said that, I'm going to go straight into the proposed general recommendations for the amendments to the land development regulations. We're going to talk about specifically the permitted uses, the dimensional requirements, and the height limits regulations. So, as I said, we'll begin with the proposed general standards for permitted uses, dimensional requirements, building examples, and height limits regulations. At the end of part 2, we'll have another Q&A session that will give us an opportunity to go over the specific questions together. For the permitted uses, we propose to expand the food and beverage, commercial, recreation, retail, and service and office use categories to all Central Beach zoning districts except the IOA, which is still primarily residential. In the IOA, we are proposing to allow limited restaurant, retail, and service uses as requested in several of our stakeholder meetings. However, those uses will be restricted by size and will be required to be within residential or hotel buildings. During the stakeholder meetings, we heard the desire to incorporate outdoor dining in the IOA as long as amplified noise is prohibited and offered only as a use incentive when providing public access to the intercoastal. Lastly, to simplify the approval process, development proposals will no longer be classified as site plan level 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is, again, the whole issue of ambiguity. But instead, they will all be subject to the site plan level 2 review process. At the end of the presentation, if you want more clarity on that, we do have staff that can explain that. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Now, in terms of the dimensional requirements, our proposed regulations are looking to really simplify the code, make it consistent, and add that level of predictability. So to do that, we are proposing to remove the FAR that we know has not worked in terms of trying to control building measures. We are also proposing to control density through building envelope measures, very specific, strict requirements for the building envelope. We're going to get to those specific things a little bit later. We are looking to add minimum lot size requirements so that it's very clear, what you need to do if you're doing a building that's higher than 6 stories, how big your minimum lot has to be, as well as minimum private open space requirements. None of the districts today have that requirement. So we want to make sure that we require private open space. We're going to add maximum lot coverages, again, to ensure that we control massing. And we're going to modify the maximum building length per the specific district in which you're in. And I'm going to show you examples of that in just a bit. We're going to maintain the existing building height, the maximum building height for each one of the districts. We're not proposing to make the SLA or the NBRA from 120 to 200 feet. The existing heights are going to stay as they are. And we're going to add some building typology examples. I'm going to show you what that means a little bit later. That give examples in a sense of a variety of scales and form, because not every building that gets built in the future has to be a tower building that is large and massive. So in terms of the setback requirements, we talked a little bit about that when we did the streets. For both front and street side, those are going to be based on your specific street frontage, again, to ensure that we can provide the minimum public realm improvements. And in terms of your interior side and rear, those are going to be based on whether your building is lower than 6 floors or higher than 6 floors. And we'll talk about those as well in a minute. In terms of the tower regulations, over and over what I kept saying in each and every one of those examples that I showed is that without specifying what the maximum floor plate size should be in a particular district, or the maximum pedestal height, or the minimum separation between towers, and minimum stepbacks of towers from low intensity adjacent development, we will never be able to have a handle and a real sense of the development pattern that can be built in this area. We'll never be able to control the mass. So, in terms of the setbacks and the building frontage requirements, as I said, we will establish specifically for the front and street side setbacks. I just want to jump right into the building frontage and active use. We talked about it with the streetscapes. We said that there will be a street network connectivity regulating plan or a plan that actually designates a hierarchy for each and every one of the streets, so that we know which streets have more priority for active use at the street level. So we will be establishing specifically for each street, based on that designated hierarchy, a minimum percentage of active use that will be required on each and every one of those streets. So again, you don't forget the fact that it's not just about putting pretty trees and landscaping. The development has to create that environment to enhance the streetscape. In terms of fenestrations and signage, for storefronts, we're going to require a minimum of 70% of fenestration at the street level. We're going to require that the maximum sill height of all windows be 24 inches to ensure that, again, you have the maximum amount of eyes and active use along the street edge when you have storefronts. In terms of the general sign standards, we have incorporated some very general standards to address signage to ensure that it's designed as part of the overall facade composition and reduce visual clutter, which is sometimes a lot of the problems that we face with commercial buildings. Now, special regulations are being proposed to ensure that the building base for buildings with higher base floor elevations are articulated well and mitigate the appearance of blank walls through the use of landscaping, terraced seating areas, and stairs, as you see in the examples to the bottom left. Now, we recognize that the current regulations seem to encourage tower building typologies and doesn't recognize the fact that there are many other building typologies that are existing and possible, such as your townhomes developments that you see that are being built within the district. The proposed regulations provide a palette of building type examples of varying scales and character to encourage more compatibility between the existing and proposed development. Now, building length requirements. We've talked extensively and showed extensive examples of those and the ones that we showed you district by district. This is one of the most negotiated standards in the Central Beach. The maximum, as I have said over and over, is 200 feet. Our analysis of the existing development pattern has shown that building length should be specific for each district and should be based on the typical lot and block configurations of the district, regardless of what building type you are developing. So in the NBRA, IOA, and SLA, the proposed maximum building length is 230 feet. So we looked at the different examples. 200 was ideal. We realized that in some cases it needs to be slightly larger in order to accommodate more active use. In the PRD, ABA, and SPMHA districts, we know that the maximum building length that's permitted by code today of 200 feet is well over exceeded, and it's not always feasible or realistic. So the proposed maximum building length is 350 feet for those districts due to the fact that these districts, again, have larger lots and blocks and have substantially more full block developments than other districts. In all cases, at the street level, a building break or forecourt, which, and again, an example of that is right here, is this little picture that you see here, should be required every 160 feet. That means that a minimum of 10 feet deep by 30 feet wide is going to be required in terms of a recess. That building wall needs to recess in order to create relief from the continuous long facade. So even if you have a 230-foot building, at every 160 feet, you would require at the street level some sort of building break to create relief from that continuous long facade. In terms of the tower standards, and I'm sorry, I didn't click. Okay, so in terms of the tower standards, the proposed regulations require that any building over 6 floors be designed as a tower building type with the following specific regulations that address the mass and scale of these buildings. So in the NBRA, IOA, and SLA again, the maximum floor plate size of the towers for mixed-use, residential, and hotel developments are proposed to be an average of 12,000 square feet and a maximum of 15,000 square feet for a single tower, with a pedestal height of a maximum of 4 stories. This is again to ensure that compatibility. In the PRD, ABA, and SVMHA, the maximum floor plate size of the towers for those same uses, whether you're mixed-use, residential, or hotel development, should be an average of 20,000 square feet and a maximum of 30,000 square feet for a single tower, with a maximum pedestal height of 5 stories. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because this is founded on that extensive analysis that we did of what works and doesn't work, to really be able to hone in on the specific changes to the regulations. Now, in the NBRA, IOA, let me jump right ahead, and the SLA, there will be a minimum tower step back required of at least 100 feet when adjacent to low-intensity development. So not only are we looking at kind of controlling the mass of the floor plate size as you exceed 6 stories in height, but we're also controlling the step back that needs to be established from any kind of low-intensity development for that tower element. In the PRD, ABA, and the SPMHA districts, we are proposing a minimum tower separation of 60 feet in order to ensure that these towers are not built up so close to one another that they still create that sort of continuous, long, endless block wall. Now let's talk about the height bonus regulations. This is something that I talked about a little bit earlier. Your existing criteria for obtaining height bonuses in both the PRD and the ABA today, under the current code, are established by a table called the Design Compatibility Community Character and Scale table, which provides a menu of options of how you can obtain that last 40 feet of additional height that you're entitled to above the 200 maximum. Many of those options are significant but difficult to measure, leaving a lot of room for ambiguity and personal interpretation. Only a few of those options are measurable and specific enough to address public benefits. Several of those options are in direct conflict with the concept of building smaller, more compact developments. But overall, the points in this table or menu of options and that design compatibility scale are way too easy to achieve. And the developments are not always producing consistent streetscape and public wall improvements for a better form and scale of buildings. And I'm going to go through each one of those so you can see why. We do have it. We can definitely share that with you. If you leave us your name and speak to Max, who's back here, we'll make sure to get you that. Okay. But let me try to do that as I go through, so at least it'll be clear for you. Actually, this table right here is the existing evaluation criteria for the height bonus provisions. So what I wanted to mention is that, because I talked about how sort of ambiguous it is, the first 5 criteria in this set of criteria for obtaining height bonuses are specific about the architectural character of the building. So let me read to you what the first one says. The first one says, if you provide distinctive design that reflects positively on the overall character of the city, you get a point. That specific criteria is very hard to measure, and it's incredibly subjective because to me, what may be a positive, let's say, or is a positive reflection of the overall character of the city may not be in any way positive for you. The second one says architectural character that reflects a particular sensitivity to the history and culture of South Florida. There's another one that is very hard to measure because for some people, the history of South Florida is the Florida vernacular type of architecture, and for others, it's the contemporary modern style of architecture. So again, that's incredibly subjective. The third is color and composition that reflects the natural colors and composition of South Florida. That blew me away because South Florida is a whole gamut of, it's the whole, I think, color spectrum, right? And so for that particular one, if there is a specific building palette that is desired for a particular area, the only way to address that would be to actually create the palette and say this is what you have to adhere to. So that obviously is not very measurable. The second to last is the architectural design represents the deviation from sameness. What is same to you may not be same to me. And then lastly, the building orientation that relieves the monotony of the building massing and scale on A1A. Well, that's actually dictated or controlled by the beach shadow restrictions that are placed for these two specific districts. Obviously, buildings that face along A1A have to step back a certain distance in order to prevent the shadow from taking away the sunbathing, basically, along the beach. So that's probably the only one that can be measured because there is a specific criteria for the setback of those buildings. And is it significant? Definitely. But can you really tell whether it's monotonous or not? That's something that, again, those sort of criteria really need to be cleaned up a bit in order to ensure that we have more clarity in terms of the, what it is that we're giving away. Because it's actually quite easy to achieve, but it's the one thing that is the most negotiated when it comes to at the commission level. All right, the next two criteria, this is another, are directly related to the potential public benefits that a development can bring. What we're suggesting is to replace it. No, we're suggesting to replace that criteria with more specific criteria that are more meaningful. So I'm going to show you what those are in a minute. And they're harder to achieve. They're not like, let's check this off and it's easy. So these next two, the first two, are directly related to the potential public benefits. So the first one says, if your development provides accessible pedestrian open spaces along A1A, you have the ability to get up to 2 points depending on the size of that pedestrian open space. Now that's the type of criteria that we want to see. It's measurable, it's definitely significant, it's directly related to the public realm improvement that you want to see. The second one says, it's along the same lines, is if your development provides distinctive public facilities that contribute to the destination resort character area. It's really, again, adding more plazas and courtyards. Again, it's something that's more quantifiable. So those two are actually pretty good. They're measurable and they're definitely desired. The last two criteria are related to lot aggregation and the consolidation of parcelized land. Remember the example I showed you of this particular building, the W, and how this development is part of two lots that were consolidated, that were at one point split by a street. Well, if you look at the second to last criteria, it says that you get points, up to 2 points, for aggregating lots, for going out there and assembling parcels, or consolidating previously parcelized land. Both of these things will happen naturally within the district as redevelopment occurs. It's not something that we should give away bonuses for. In our opinion, it encourages larger parcels, and it's not always the best thing when you're trying to maintain a certain character and scale within the district. Now, let me